It's time to warp up the 3D printed rigid Heddle Loom. Welcome to Hacker Week. I built this Heddle Loom about a month or two ago, I guess. There was another video. I'll post that in the description down below so you can go watch it. And today, what I want to do is warp this thing up and show you how that's done, and then we'll start weaving a dish towel. So your basic run-of-the-mill dish towel is about 16 by 24, 14 by 25. They vary a little bit, but I'm kind of working from about a 15 by 24 size by the time it shrinks a little bit. So we're going to work all of the math on how much warp and weft we need based on those numbers. Let's take a look at the math. Right then, our dish towel is 15 by 24 inches. I'm going to use two colors. So let's just call it 25 inches long. Then we're going to factor in 10% for take-up. Take-up is what happens when you're doing some weaving. Of course, the thread has to go above, below, above, below. It's no longer in a straight line, so it shrinks up a little bit because of that above and below. So we're going to add 10% for take-up. So that comes out to 27.5 inches. We also need to add on 8 inches for tie-up at the front of the loom, then about 16 inches for tie-up at the rear, and some waste that will happen. I'll show you where all that comes into play later. That comes out to 51.5 inches. Let's just round it up to 52 inches. Now I'm going to use 124 ends because what I'm going to do is two colors, and I'm going to alternate 31 strands of one color, 31 strands of another color, and we'll leave it at that. So let's see, 124 ends times 52 inches in length. That's 6,448 inches divided by 36 inches, which is 1 yard, comes out to 179.1 yards total. Let's divide that by 2 because we're using two colors, 89.5 yards per color. That is what we need for the warp. Let's look at the calculations for how much weft we need. This particular 4-ply yarn is about 10 threads per inch. I just put a ruler on there and measured it. So 10 threads per inch on that. It's 24 inches total length that I'm after, times 10 threads per inch. That's 240 threads for the entire length of 24 inches. Now I'm using 31 warps per color and alternating them, so times 4, that's 124 divided by 8 dent reed, 8 per inch. That's 15.5 inches width of what I will actually be working with on the loom. That number goes here now. 240 threads times 15.5 inches. So 240 threads running like this times 15.5 inches width back and forth comes out to 3,720 inches. And we're going to add 10% for take-up. That's a total of 4,092 inches divided by 36 inches in a yard. 113.66 yards total weft needed, divided by two colors because I'm going to alternate the colors as I go. Comes out to 56.83 yards per color of weft. Now I've got 120 yards on each one of these colors. I'm going to have to go buy some more because what I want to do is use these two colors. Then I can end up with kind of a checkerboard pattern, which will become evident as I start weaving. We're going to pull the thread from the center of this skein. We're just going to drop it down here in the box so that it can feed nicely. The first thing I'm going to do is tie it to the take-up roller here. Now on most looms this would be a back stick or an apron as it's called, but on this one, the way that this was designed, you don't need that. It's got a place here and here where you can tie off. So we'll just park that right there and lock it in position, and we're going to just tie off right here. Just a simple square knot. Now what we're going to do is take this and run it through the first slot, not the hole, but the slot. So, grab the reed hook. Give me a little bit of help here. And what I'm going to do now is take this and pull it through around the warping peg, which is up here, right? And then just get the slack out of it, bring it back here. So remember earlier when I calculated that I need 52 inches total of warp length. So I've measured from here to the warping peg, and as it turns out at the edge of the table it's just about 54 inches, so that's close enough. So I'm going to set the warping peg up there and we'll start winding on our warp. On this loom, there's not a backstick or an apron. It's just this simple take-up roller with two dowels you tie directly to here. I'm going to refer to it as the apron because that's a common term used for this area. So we're going to start off by just tying this on a square knot to get started. Now we're going to start in the very first slot, not the hole, but the slot. I'm going to take the yarn, hook it on here. I've got the heddle in the middle neutral position. We're going to pull it through, and we're going to go all the way up to the other end to the warping peg, let it wrap around there, and come back. Now it's on the top of the apron, we'll go underneath. We'll go to the next slot, not the hole. The holes we'll take care of later. All the way up to the warping peg and back. After a while you get in a rhythm. Now you notice this is on the underside of the apron now, so we go over the top. Into the next slot. Be careful you don't skip any. Up to the warping peg, back around. Now it's on the top, so you have to go under. Through the next slot. And so forth. As you're doing this, try not to put too much tension on. Don't stretch it really tight, just pull it where it just takes out all of the wrinkles, basically. You don't want to put too much pre-tension on the warp because we're going to take care of that later. We want it to stay as even as possible in this stage of warping. So right now I'm at 30 threads, and what I want is 31, and the way that's going to work out is I'm going to come up to this end, and this thread is number 31. So what I'm going to do is snip this off, and I'm just going to tie it off here. Try to keep the same amount of tension on it. Okay, now I'm going to switch colors. I'm going to pull this thread back out. I'm going to switch over to my tan color. I'm going to thread that tan color through the same slot. Now, normally this wouldn't happen if I was working with an even number, but the way that I'm wanting this to work out with 31 per color, this is how I have to do it. So I'm going to tie it off here. And now I can just go back down to this end and just continue on for the next 31 in the same manner. Move over to the next slot, pull it through, around the warping peg, and so on. Okay, I'm at 31 threads, and there are 2 threads coming back through this time because I started up at the other end on the warping peg and came back and forth, so now I end up with 2 here. So that means I can just tie off this one to the apron. Now we can go back to the pink color. And we'll tie off on the apron again. And now we start warping in the same manner with that color. After a while you get a nice rhythm going. The muscle memory kicks in. And before you know it, you're moving right along. Last one. So we're going to tie this off. And now we can move on to the rest of the stringing. Now back up here at the warping peg, we're going to put a piece of scrap yarn around the whole thing and just tie it off. Put a square knot in it. Then we're going to slide this whole thing off and let's put the scissors down through there and we're going to cut it. Now somewhere in there's a couple of them with the knots that we tied. So I'm going to make sure we get rid of those knots. And again, that's only if you're doing an odd number per color. Should be one more. There it is. Two more. Okay, all the knots are out. Now we can wind this up at the other end. I've taped a piece of Christmas wrapping paper on here. I've gotten it as parallel as I can get it by eyeball. The reason it's there is that so when we wind this up, that paper will be in between each layer of the warp and keep it from squishing into each other, which can cause some discrepancies in the tension. So now it's time to wind this up. Now in this part, if you got a helper, it's wonderful because they can be on this end, keeping tension on this as you roll it up. It needs to have a little tension as you roll it down on that end to the take-up roller. So what I'm going to do is this little trick I made up. Just go right around the warping peg with this piece of twine, and I can pull it back down to this end. And as I go ahead and start winding this up, I can keep a little bit of tension on it with the string. Okay, let's see how this goes. Hopefully this paper stays fairly parallel. Now I'm going to just adjust these a little so that they're a little more evenly dispersed. It looks pretty good. I just go with it. That's working quite nicely. And we're going to stop right about there. I'm going to lock this in place. Now we go back to the other end and tie it off. So before we do the tie off here, there's one more thing that needs to be done. Let's get this piece that I tied everything together with away from everything. I'm just going to pull these out, get them a little bit sorted out. Now what I need to do on each one of these slots, I need to take one of the threads, just one, and pull it back out. And then what we're going to do is put it through the tiny hole that's right next to it. Now I'm going to put it in the hole that's to the left of the slot that I pulled it out of. We're going to do this all the way across. I think what I'm going to do is work from the right side to the left, that I'm not reaching over what I've already done. I think that will work best. It helps if you move the ones that you've already done off to the side, and you can keep track of just where you're at with everything. So just like anything else with repetition, the more you do a thing, the easier it gets. The muscle memory kicks in, and before you know it, you're moving right along. And that is it. I've got the loom turned the other way and clamped on that side of the table so that I can work from this side and tension everything. What I'm after now is to divide these up into smaller groups so that I can tie them around the apron on this side. I think I'll split these up into groups of like 4. So let's take those 2 and then do these 2. We're going to tie these off just like I did the rug loom, basically the same type of thing. I'm just going to go around here from the bottom up. Oop, we missed one. And then just put an overhand knot in the whole thing. Looks like I might need just a little more slack. So let's back this off a little bit more. Give myself just a little more to work with. There we go. That's better. And just like with the rug loom, just an overhand knot for now. Leave it like that. Move on to the next group. I'm just going to do this all the way across. And just like the rug loom, it was all about getting the tensions even. And once we're happy with it, we'll go ahead and tie it off in a square knot. Now we need to even out the warps. So what we're going to do is just take a piece of scrap yarn and just put it around the shuttle like this. I'm going to put it on the raised shed here. We're going to put it through, and we're just going to leave it over on this side. We're not going to beat it down yet. And we're going to leave it looped and put it through the same shed again. I'm going to hold this end and push it through there. And the reason for this is later this can be pulled out. So it's just a loop at this end and a loop at this end. Now we'll switch sheds. We're not going to beat it yet. And these reeds, being as they're 3D printed, are still just a little bit, a lot of friction in them. Let's put it that way. So now we're going to run this through again, but leave the loop in it over on that side. Like so. And then now we're going to go ahead and beat it back. And you can see what that's done for us. Now we've got a nice even tension across there, even spacing on all of the warps, and we're ready to start weaving. I've got some, I think this is 4-ply cotton blend that I'm going to use because I want to put a header in here. because later what I want to do is, I'm not going to do tassels on the end. I'm going to put a header, fold it over, and stitch it. So I'll have a nice clean hem on each end of my towel. So I'm going to load up some of this on my shuttle. That should be enough. Okay, I'm just going to tie one end here. Let's get started. Go to the upper shed. I'm going to pull that across. Not going to pull it tight, just going to leave it at an angle like this. And that will allow for the take up. Also give me a nice clean salvaged edge. And I'll put the shed in the lower setting. We're going to come back through. And just hang on to it over here. And just leave it that angle like that. Beat it down. Change sheds back to the upper one. So I've moved this down to the edge of the table now in my squeaky chair, and I've got about 1 inch of this cotton blend woven in there as a nice little header. So now I can clip this over here, and let's see, I'm going to change sheds. And we're just going to go ahead and run this back in and leave it there. It's a bit easy. Just use my shuttle to give me a hand here. Open this shed up a little bit. And I'm just going to tuck that in right there and leave it. Now we can start with our first color. So let's see, I'll get started with the first color here. Make sure I'm on the same shed I was with the white blend right there. I'm going to poke that down through the bottom. So we can trim it off later. I'll take a little piece of my yarn. I'm just going to push it in here a little ways, and I'll just use my reed hook. And we're just going to get some of this yarn started. So I'm just going to use my reed hook to poke it down through, and just let it poke out the bottom, and I'll come back later to trim that off. Just beat that into place. Now we'll change sheds and start weaving in some color. Don't really like the way that happened. I'm going to pull it up. There we go. Leave it at an angle to allow for take up. Beat that down good. Change sheds and move right along here. Okay, this is pretty much finished. I had just finished up adding a section for a hem, so now I can cut this off the loom. Get the heddle out of the way. And I'm going to cut this and leave about 4 inches warp. Pretty. Couple mistakes. See, like right here where you can see I skipped a couple. You can see that, but anyway, not a big deal. It's the imperfections that make it look handmade. Well, I'm just gonna run with that anyway. Time to do some sewing. There it is after a wash and dry. Shrunk about 12% roughly. But it still looks nice, feels really nice. Got some imperfections, but I don't care because it's homemade, so whatever. Next time I'll have a loom that's set up with more tension on it. There's a few things I'd like to tweak on that design, and some of it would be the ratchet, the take-up on the take-up roller and on the warp roller. Let's take a look at that. So I had some problems with this area right here, and it's partly because there's not enough teeth on the ratchet gear. There needs to be more teeth. And then this design, while it was a good idea to avoid having to do the little apron bar, it doesn't really work that well, because if you think about it, what's happening is this has now got a lot of leverage as it's pulling, but then when it gets here, it has hardly any. Now it diminishes to almost nothing for a bit. And then the top one starts to take over for rolling. And anyway, a better setup would be just a round dowel across here with a conventional apron bar to connect it to. So I think I'll do a little mod on this and see if I can get it to work a little better. I've got a 3D printed version of this handle and a gear that I did for a different loom that's a much, I guess you'd call it, higher resolution. It's got way more gears than this and a much better pawl setup. In hindsight, the little peg that went in here, I should have printed that 100% fill. I think I did it like 20, not strong enough. I ended up putting a wooden dowel in there, and that helped me finish things out a little bit easier. Tension on a loom is very critical, and that's why I made those few mistakes where I picked up some warps and dropped some warps that I shouldn't have. But overall, this is a fun little design. It works. It just needs a few modifications, and that's kind of how things go. You build something and release it out in the wild, and people modify it and make it better. So that wraps up this video. Next time we're back with the rug loom again, which is behind me, and I'm going to actually start doing a rug on that one. This loom thing is lots of fun. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time.